Tutorial Podcast, a podcast offering discussions and tutorials about nerdy subjects for people who aren't necessarily nerdy themselves. With you today is your nerdy tutor, myself, George, and with me today, Duel Master, my mom.
Hey.
So we were talking about Magic the Gathering here last time the various uniqueness of the game, and then kind of a little bit of the history and a little bit of the community as well. And over this last weekend, we got to play some Magic, and we've had a chance. We had this wonderful box of Magic the Gathering that, if you're kind of just interested, it's $30, and it's got 5 different decks in it that are all very well designed and very, very good synergistic elements to it. We played a few of them, and I think it's a great way to just kind of get started if you're even just vaguely interested at all, if only just because it's got enough in here, and at $30, it's not going to break the bank, I think, really.
Well, and plus you have enough actually to start with, a couple of friends and get it going.
And these are like pretty easily modifiable too, so that if you wanted to go and get like a booster deck and you found a card you like, you could add that to these decks to help you out.
Right, and it even has like a little guide card that I thought was really useful that tells you how complex the deck is, the speed, like some decks are really heavy on spells. I had a red deck, which was very heavy on spells, and was fairly simple, not too complex.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, we'll link that. I'll link the Amazon link I have for that in our podcast here. If only just because I thought it was really a really good little thing to have here at the end of the day.
Well, and the other thing is it has a nice little game book. Gives you instructions. Comes with the life dice.
Yep, comes with a 20-sided dice. You can help track your life throughout the game. And I thought it was a very nice little investment here for not too much at the end of the day, I think.
Yeah.
All right. So Mom, what have you had the chance to do here in this last week beyond playing Magic the Gathering?
Okay, so we played. You took it easy on me.
I did.
And the biggest observation I came away with from playing is you really need sort of a tutor to help you get started. But in that light, there's a shit ton of tutors out there. There are. I was unprepared for how many resources there are. First of all, there's all sorts of YouTube how to get started.
Yes.
And there's all sorts of YouTube about beginning theory. Mm-hmm. There's YouTube about advanced theory. There's YouTube about everything.
Oh yeah.
And so before I even get into all the other things there are, you could YouTube yourself to death on this. There's hours and hours. There's weeks of YouTube tutorials out there.
Commentary on what they're doing, why they did X, Y, and Z, how they constructed this deck, how this deck is supposed to work. Lots of commentary.
Thumbing through a deck that costs several $1,000s. Special cards. We'll talk about later about some of the other things I found. But one of the things that interested me is there's also people selling their services to Skype or FaceTime with you and teach you how to play. Mm-hmm. So there are not only tutorials, there are tutors.
Oh yes, Magic's one of those things. If you decided to go that way, you could. I think an easier way is sometimes to just go to your local game shop and ask, hey, when do people who play Magic get in? Or do you guys have like a tournament or something? Because that's very easy to find other people. And a lot of people are usually more than happy to teach other people getting into a game because that gets them into the game. And nerds, of course, myself included, like to kind of show about what we know.
Well, and beyond that, the more people that are playing, the more people
to play with.
So, so I found there's just resources galore. Mm-hmm. The problem is there are resources galore, and there's a ton of jargon and trying to understand. I found myself. I printed a glossary of terms. I mean, look how many pages this thing is.
You got to have at least a good 10, 15 pages there.
Yes, 14 pages. It's 14 pages of just glossary terms, and it doesn't even have some of the terms I had questions about. So, like I never knew there was a chomp block. which is to block with a creature in order to preserve your life total, even though yours will be the only creature dying in the exchange.
Yes.
So there's a bounce to return a card to it. They're just all kinds
these different terms, and these are different terms that have come up throughout the history of Magic's different expansions in order to help either change the game in subtle ways or make new ways of playing the game, especially for people who, and again, they're very short one-word sort of terms because it's intentional to convey the meaning of what they're trying to say without having obviously to say so much. Because again, as you notice the cards, half the card is art, the other half is the rules.
Well, and the rules aren't always like what's an SRCY?
A scry.
Yeah. Yeah, SCRY. Yeah. Which is to lift a card and then place it on the bottom of your deck, which serves the purpose of knowing that you can't play it, but knowing that you might come across it on the bottom of your deck.
Yeah, again, some cards, I mean, sometimes it says that you scry 3 cards, but you get to keep one of them. So you get to pick the top 3 cards, look at them, and then pick one of them sometime. And we might be getting the terminology wrong, because I'm going to let you guys in on the fact that I don't play Magic the Gathering.
Well, you play well enough to be able to...
I know enough to be able to play it. If you were to ask me like complex rules and like even in some of the rules we were going through, I had to read up on them and.
Which brings me to another. Okay, so first of all, I would suggest anybody starting out print a glossary. I found 6 different glossaries out there. I printed one by Reed Duke, who has a lot of different stuff out there, and this is I found this on level 1, which I found was a good resource. Okay, so that's where I found this one, but there's bunches of them.
Oh yes,
bunches of glossaries. I was looking for one that really was just play terms.
Just play terms and simplicity, I would imagine.
Yeah. So I was looking for one that was just play terms, and if you went through this is, but there are ones that are glossaries on cards, glossaries on different planes.
Yes. So like different expansions exist on different planes, and if you wanted to, there's some libraries and sources on the internet that let you kind of like, oh, I want to know about everything that was on Plains of Takar that has like lifelink on it or something, and you could pull up something that showed all the cards that have that.
Right.
And you could even differentiate it between like, oh, I want it with like 1 mana or 2 mana. Like you could narrow it down if you absolutely needed to, or you could say, oh, all the cards that are currently in standard, but I'm looking for something that's white, that's like a 4/4 in like vigilance or something. Like, you know, you'll get every single card that's a 4/4 card with vigilance or something that might even give it to you.
And when you say 4/4, that's both its attack power and its lives.
And its defense, yeah.
Yeah,
and that's how I describe it.
Yeah, and that's a score that's down on the bottom of the card.
For creatures, usually.
For creatures, yes.
Mm-hmm.
We'll back up and talk about the experience of playing the game.
Mm-hmm.
It struck me a lot like chess, where the first 5 moves are set up.
Yes.
And you can go through those first 5 moves really quickly. They don't take much thought. You got to get land out there.
Oh yes, land being a very important thing to have.
Because that creates your mana, which allows you to develop everything else.
And now some people when they make their decks, devise it all around single mana or 2 mana cards. So
now, how do you keep people honest shuffling?
Usually they'll shuffle, and then the other person's supposed to cut their deck.
Okay.
So typical, if you were like playing poker, if I shuffled a deck, I would give it to you to cut it, and then you would cut it at that point.
Okay.
We didn't do that because we didn't do that in our case because like
you trust
you're my mom and I don't trust you. I mean, we were doing this mostly for fun, and even if I did scam you at the end of the day, like A, would you know, and B, would you care?
You purposely let me win, but which was fun. So the things that struck me, typical game, half hour, less,
maybe 20 minutes or so, maybe.
Yeah, it goes pretty fast.
Mm-hmm.
Like volleyball is the first to 20. Volleyball is 21.
Uh-oh.
But okay, so it goes pretty fast.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of different types of strategies. So, I think the thing for me, the advantage I would have is that I'm like pretty mentally agile. I can switch mind thoughts pretty quickly, and that would be a skill you need. Because just like chess has pieces that move in different ways, you have mana, and then you have sorcery, and some things are instant, and some things allow you to create your sort of
tokens,
token creatures, and then you have to develop your own creatures, and then you have to figure out what the creatures across the board from you are doing, because when you play white, you had Pegasus,
a Pegasus creature, which was a 1/3 with flying, and the intention was that the flying creatures can't be blocked except by other flying creatures. So they're great creatures to have if you wanted to directly attack your opponent's life total, which eventually is kind of the thing at the end of the day. Very much if you go back to chess, the entire point is to get the king at the end of the day. The problem is you have to go through a lot of other pieces to get to it. But in this case, with Magic, and if I have a flying creature, I go directly at you. I don't have to worry about anything trying to block a flying creature, unless it's a sorcery, instant spell, or another creature that flies.
Yeah. So it does require. It requires at some point, if you're ever going to be good, you're going to have to get familiar with just all sorts of stuff. And so one of my follow-up questions for you was, our starter kit came with 5 decks, which each have a certain flavor to them.
Yes.
Okay, so, and we talked about that last week. We talked about one's sort of more nature, one's sort of more water, one's, fire, one's...
They have their own kind of individual kind of theming to them.
Right.
That's kind of this lore theming to them, but they also have their own mechanical theming to them.
And you can mix other things in, but there's a certain synergy as long as you're playing within a specific color. Usually
there's a specific synergy kind of baked into the color that you're using. Like in my example, in my case here, I had a lot of creatures which were human knights, and I had some creatures which said every human knight gets +1/+1 for the turns if I have, depending on how many I have. So in some cases, in a lot of cases, you might focus your deck either around a particular type of creatures in a game. Like your deck, in your case here, your red deck had quite a number of goblins in it.
Right.
Which was kind of the intention that, in a lot of cases, that if you tend to go toward a single color, you might just pick a creature type, because that creature type is going to give you a lot more benefit. If we go way back in the day, the original version of the game, the one that you gifted me, there was a red creature that was an ape, and if you had green forest, though, you got a bonus. He got a bonus of +1/+1. So in that case, it would have been ideal to have both the green and red cards in your deck, if only just so that way that one creature would get +1/+1 in a synergistic fashion. Now, if I didn't have it, it's a regular creature, but if I didn't have green in that deck, that regular, like Silverback Gorilla, I think it is, would just be a regular Silverback Gorilla without any plus or minuses to him, without the green forest. So there's some, in a lot of cases when it comes to just like, if you just want to play like a black deck, you might just focus on like vampires. Because there's a lot of cards that say if you depending on how many vampires you have or things like that. In your case, you had goblins. And
I had goblins, and I had a sorcery spell that caused immediate damage based on how many goblins I already had out. So when I pulled that creature out, even though it was in sick mode,
summoning sickness is what we call it.
Summoning sickness. It still caused damage because it caused damage based on how many goblins I already had out.
Yes.
Okay. So there's a reason for playing specific colors. So my follow-up question is, are the 5 colors all the colors there are? There's no purple.
There's no purple. There's no gold. There's no silver. There's no orange. There's no other colors. Now, what you'll find is there are other cards that are other colors.
Right.
So we saw a couple gray cards in here, which are artifact cards.
Right.
In most cases, usually either an enchantment or a creature in some cases, and oftentimes you saw they didn't have any colored mana requirements, it just had a mana requirement.
Right.
So most of the cards we had here had a requirement of either some colored mana and then some number of non-colored mana. So you might have
and mana being land.
Mana being your lands that you have. But again, if you're playing two different colors here, you will have both red mana, for example, and green mana. One card might say you require 2 red mana and 3 regular mana, any colored mana.
Well, so here's my caveat for playing, because I would like to play again. I'm sticking with one color until
and a lot of people do.
I get good with this.
A lot of people do find themselves enjoying a singular color in most cases.
Right, and I kind of got used to the idea, because at one point we switched, and you played a different color.
Mm-hmm. So initially, I was playing a white deck, and Mom was playing a red deck. And then eventually, we decided we'd switch for a little bit. So I decided I wanted to play a blue deck because I wanted to see how that played.
Yeah.
And Mom gave it a chance at a white deck.
Yeah. So with the red deck, I felt very comfortable that I had to develop a lot of land quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Because I had a lot of creatures that required quite a few mana, but did quite a bit of damage.
Mm-hmm.
You had more creatures in the white deck that required very little mana, but just didn't do that much damage.
Oh, I'd almost say it's a little different, maybe, because I frequently needed to have at least 4 to 5 mana to pull out some of my creatures.
Yeah.
But then it would be the only thing I could do. So a lot of the time I was very starved for mana. You were never starved for mana.
I was never starved, yeah. And I had, and I was really proud of myself, because I figured out how to use one of my sorcery spells.
Oh yeah, no, you did
really well. Yeah, and I could pull out all this mana, and then just however many mana I had was X on my sorcery card, and that's how much damage I did.
So what Mom did at one point here was that she had these goblins that did two target damage every time you played a sorcery spell.
Right.
And so Mom plays a sorcery spell, which is this great fireball sort of thing. She's got I think 10 or 11 mana out at this point. It costs 2 to start it up, but every additional mana after that is damage that you do.
Yeah.
So Mom, in this particular case, for me, just decided, okay, well, I'm going to not only... oh no, you had 9 mana out. So you did
9 mana out.
So not only did you do just 7 damage with all that fire, with that single fireball to me, your goblins each did also got to do an extra 2 damage well, so I took 11 points of damage, and then the goblins went and attacked me, and I got even more damage. So I ended up taking about 13 points of damage at the end of the day.
Yeah.
It was wow, that's a really cool little bit of work there.
That was cool. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So I slowly figured things out.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess my observations would be, it develops quickly, much like chess, where when you get started, there's just a standard set, and that goes really fast.
Mm-hmm.
And then once you start developing creatures, as long as you can keep everybody alive, that goes pretty fast too.
Yes.
So my question for you is, if you had a gathering of friends over, and you figure you play 5-6 games.
So you do a little tournament, maybe you could do a little round robin tournament, and everybody might play the best of 3, or the best of 5 maybe. And usually you might have snacks in between, waiting for the next person, depending on who you were going to play with here. Not uncommon.
Okay.
And again, other times it might be just a single elimination tournament, which is often the case for drafting. When you have 8 players with you, that makes a perfect little tournament there. If you have 6 people, that's more like a round robin sort of thing. Whoever does the best, and whoever has the 2 best win ratios gets to play for the finals, I guess. A little bit different for every different rule sets for everybody, and some people just like playing.
Okay.
They don't necessarily have to be in a tournament, and they don't necessarily have to be doing anything in particular. They might just like playing.
Okay, so let's talk about. So we talked about how you play with others.
Mm-hmm.
Forgive the term, but you can play with yourself.
Yes, you could.
And there are all sorts of forms of playing with yourself, and there are new forms being released. So in part of my little YouTube, first of all, there's 4 different ways to play on my iPhone.
Yes.
literally 4 different ways to play on my iPhone.
Mm-hmm.
So then I was trying to compare what people liked about different ways of playing on your iPhone. There's opinions about that out there.
Oh, yes.
There's all sorts of YouTube opinions about everything.
Mm-hmm.
And there's lots of discussion about rotating versus non-rotating, which, if I understand correctly, is having to do with planes and where you're playing.
So yeah, so what they call is the standard rotation, or sometimes it's just also just known as standard or just the current rotation, which is also kind of just the basic cards you could use at this particular time.
Right.
And that's, and again, typically that's whatever's been released usually within the last year to year and a half.
So there's a lot of discussion in the online Magic the Gathering communities as to whether or not that's really okay. If you should really sort of freeze if you're gonna buy the game and play it online, and there's money
that you can spend online for a lot of stuff.
Yeah. So so the discussion was, then is it really fair that the games be in rotation, and shouldn't you have a choice? And you do have a choice
Mm-hmm.
between apps that are in rotation and not in rotation.
Yes.
Okay, so then the discussion evolves from there, because there's all sorts of comparisons between ways you can play, both on your iPhone. There are several ways to play, several platforms to play in online games on your laptop.
Mm-hmm.
So you could play this every way to Sunday.
Oh yes, and some people have in a lot of cases. I know the YouTubers that I recommend for you. Initially had a lot of their content on their main channel that was all Magic related. What they ended up doing since then is they ended up creating just a secondary Magic channel that's all about just Magic the Gathering for them, and that's where they show. So they have two different podcasts.
And this is the two guys.
Oh no! So this is actually a bunch of guys actually.
Oh, okay, because
So
I keep seeing the same two guys.
The one with a really big beard and one with like a brown beard and one with like black hair.
Yes.
Yeah, so that would be Graham and James from Loading Ready Run. They
Yeah.
ended up playing a lot of Magic the Gathering, and they're originally were playing a different version of the game. It was Magic Online, and then they switched to Magic Arena when the game obviously launched, because they actually are sponsored by Wizards of the Coast, because they do the Friday Night series, which Wizards of the Coast literally pays them to do.
Okay, so just to back up just a little bit,
Okay.
if you just wanted a fun sort of, you needed to go on some oasis somewhere because you were super stressed out or your cat just died or something.
You just need something to
Yeah.
chill with.
Almost everything I found, even the stuff that was criticisms or critiques of different ways of playing, is all very campy. All of it is very campy.
It's like they know their audience.
Yeah, so it's like nerdtastic, and it's delivered with tremendous humor,
Mm-hmm.
and there are a lot of inside jokes I don't get.
Which is fair. I mean, I watch a lot of Magic. When I watch Friday nights, even though like I know who these people are in this contextual world, because these are not who these people really are. They're playing
Right.
characters. They're
Right.
playing their Seinfeld versions of themselves. Is the way they describe
And by
it.
the way, I enjoyed that quite a bit.
Yeah, they're very campy. I think in general, like you'll notice that like a lot of nerds, when they're just talking about anything in general, especially in a very visual format here, that is YouTube, that campiness is kind of their way of getting across to the audience that they're a little nervous about what they're talking about to begin with, despite the fact that they may be the people that actually made the game. But I think they're also just kind of reaching out to their same demographics, in which, like, yeah, we know that we're grown adults in our 30s and 40s and sometimes 50s and 60s playing a card game, like...
They're very self-deprecating.
But that's a very much a nerdy thing as well. Nerds are very self-deprecating. Because it's very much the notion of, like, yeah, what I'm doing is really strange and really weird. I'm okay with that, and you're going to make fun of me anyway, so let me make fun of myself first, so then you can't use that against me.
Okay.
And that's kind of the logic with a lot of nerd stuff like that. Like, it's like, I'll even do that when, like, I even was saying that earlier in work, that it was like, you only get like 20% of me at work because I purposely toned down my weirdness so that I don't offend other people. And that in its own way is very much a self-deprecating comment, because I can be my true self, and I don't think people really want the me that I am when I'm by myself, which is a kind of far more talkatively nerdy person that's a little bit of a shut-in occasionally. But again, I mean, like, that's nerds in general. Like, nerds for the most part don't have the option to go to a lot of places to geek out with other people. Like, they can't just walk into an office and be like, hey, you guys see what happened on Fortnite last? Did you see the new expansion for Fortnite? A lot of times you walk into an office setting and it's like, hey, did you see the game last night? It's like, and that's the more semi-appropriate thing. Although,
Yeah.
the one thing I will say is that people who play fantasy football are just as big a nerds as people who play Dungeons and Dragons.
It's just a more acceptable nerddom.
It's just a more acceptable nerdom. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so a lot of it, even the most serious of it, like one of the ones I enjoyed is a guy, because then I was looking at different forms, and new forms are coming out all the time. There's Commander, there's now Pioneer, which just came out.
Yes, new formats.
Okay, so, one of the ones I watched is a community college professor.
Oh, the Tolarian Community College. Yes.
Yes, that's real, right?
Well, okay, so it's not an actual community college. It's just a guy who's playing a professor.
Oh, okay. I didn't even get that it wasn't actual.
No. It's not an actual college. I assure you it's not an actual college. Basically what it is that he calls himself the professor. He's in... Basically what ends up happening is that he was initially just talking about magic, and then he met a person online who was a well-known magic cosplayer who lived in like the same town as he did, and so she would come over and talk about it as well. One day she came dressed up, and they were like, hey, why don't we do a little bit here, which became the Tolarian Community College, which is a place in one of the different planes of magic.
That's why I was getting... Okay, so that's back to my earlier comment. There are a lot of inside jokes I wasn't getting.
Oh, no, there's a lot of inside jokes.
It was obvious the joke was being made, but... okay, so I liked him a lot. I found him...
He's very fun, and he's very interesting. He's very honest, and he's very
straight up and easy to understand. And he doesn't use as much jargon.
No.
When he talks about something, you get enough explanation. Mm-hmm. I got enough explanation I could catch on to what. So one of the things I listened to was he did a whole 20-minute thing on Pioneer, which just came out on the 22nd of October.
Mm-hmm. New format.
And he was talking about the advantages and disadvantages, and that's where he's talking about, well, it's not a game in rotation, and he talked about the advantages of that, but then he talked about banned cards. Mm-hmm. Okay, so he talked about he's like somewhere in the middle. I never was clear where he stands on it, because he talked about the advantages and the disadvantages of banned cards, and so as I understand it, so you'll have to correct me here. Mm-hmm. The issue is that when you go into new formats, some cards will break the game.
Yes.
And they'll break the game because they won't work correctly with whatever that online format is. You may have paid money for that card, and you have an investment in it, and you know how to use it. Maybe you've even designed parts of your deck around it. But when you play it, because it's an online game and the online game has algorithms, it'll break the game.
Well, not just in the game. So when the notion of like a banned card, what that often means is that sometimes two different mechanics don't work. Well, they do two different things. Sometimes they work too well, or sometimes don't, or sometimes they do things that break the game. So these are often...
Yeah, and he talked about it in both directions. Sometimes you can create, because you have a card that if it's not banned, and these are cards that worked in previous versions, if it's not banned, it can interact with a new card in a way that makes you so powerful that you're unhappy enough. I mean, not actually, but in theory.
Yeah, the notion is that, like, if you play these two cards together, they let you basically have infinite turns, so the other player can't play it all. I once encountered a person, and there's actually a good episode about this, where a guy basically has a card that says the next guy skips his turn. You get to play. You get to play your own turn.
Oh.
Again, it's called Time Warp.
Okay.
And the notion is that you play this card, the next player skips his turn, you get to start your turn all over from the beginning again.
Oh, and you just keep replaying the card.
There's another card that lets you keep, you put that in your graveyard. There's another card that would let you bring that back out of the graveyard, and you can have up to 4 of them in your deck, and you have 4 of these other cards in your deck.
Which is why you need somebody else to cut your cards, because you could easily stack your deck.
You could very easily stack your deck. Now, in a lot of cases, what people will do now is that they will buy sleeves for their cards. So these are card holders that are very flimsy, so you can't tell which cards are which at all.
Yeah.
So they might either all have like a white background or black background, or they might have like a magic character on them. They have different things like that. And the intention being is that these are like a standardized versions of cards, so you can't tell what's on the back side. You can't tell which cards are which at the end of the day. And then if you also have cards that are double-faced cards as well, they allow them to be easily shuffled, because if you had like a double-faced card on the top of your deck, you obviously know what the next card is going to be. So it's kind of,
because you know what the other side is.
Yeah, and that's usually the case for.
It's like having marked cards.
Yeah, and that's like a case for like werewolves, for example, where werewolves have like a good side, have like a human side, and then have a werewolf side. But if you can see both sides of the card, when it becomes the top of your deck, you're like, well, I know what that card is.
Yeah.
So it's not kind of fair at the end of the day, because you know what the next card is, and your opponent knows what the next card is. It's an advantage that you basically lose at the end of the day. But having a sleeve for that would make it so that the next person doesn't know what the next card is. You don't know what the next card is. Or maybe you got a card that says, look at the top deck of your card.
But you're not going to sleeve all your cards.
No, you would sleeve all your cards.
You would sleeve all your cards? Oh,
yeah,
wow.
to keep it fair, because then if you knew which ones were sleeved and which ones weren't sleeved, then you could make an assumption off of that, and then your opponent could do the same.
You could determine what you're playing.
Yeah.
Okay. So back to the online thing. There, I think there seem to be a number of different styles of players.
Oh yeah.
Okay, and so as I was looking at the different online formats, because there's multiples of them.
Oh yeah.
And there's formats where you just randomly play online with another live person who's playing.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
There are formats where you're playing an algorithm. There are.
So this is Magic Arena that we're talking about.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I'm sorry, Magic. Well, but there are other formats also on iPhone. There are formats.
Mm-hmm.
There are formats.
Yeah, like I remember when I was
Arena is certainly where the most information on YouTube is available.
Yeah, so Magic Arena is quickly becoming the standard for that, because again, it's the people who make Magic the Gathering who do a really good job of being able to curate the cards online, and the algorithmic bots that they were able to finally create for the game to play it in a kind of a legit fashion.
Yeah.
Are really good, because you could theoretically make the deck that you always wanted to use.
And test it out
right away. And you could test it out against other types of decks.
Yeah.
Assuming you had the right cards of the game already. Now, mind you, again, you have to earn the cards, and in some cases you might have to buy the cards. But if you're playing Magic to a certain degree in which you are playing professionally, it'd probably be worth it to you at some level, to even just to be playing online, because it's continuous practice, and it's knowing
honing your skills. It's like your father playing the chess computer all the time.
Yeah, and in that case, yeah, and eventually you would get these cards anyways through playing the online game, because it rewards you for playing with more cards, which makes you keep wanting to keep going and going, which is such
it's self-feeding.
Self-feeding cycle.
Yeah. So I would suggest that anybody who's looking at either a mobile app or an online
variant of the game.
I would suggest you go out there and read or watch some of the critiques. Mm-hmm. Again, the gentleman from the community college,
the Tolarian Community College, the professor.
He gave what I thought were the most succinct, because he has posts on several of the formats.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and I found his the easiest to follow. And
he was a teacher at one point, which is why he's known as a professor. So he's akin to understanding how to approach topics and teach them in a viable way. And if you're probably watching his content, he probably is kind of aware that you're more of a newer player. He caters more toward introductory and kind of middle sort of game understandings. So
yeah,
it's
because some of the other ones would lose me with the jargon.
Oh yeah,
sitting there with printing out glossaries. Okay, so I found his easier to, and I found him very succinct, and I could follow his he's very neutral. I felt he was very fair because he'll tell you clearly what he likes and doesn't like, and he'll argue both sides. And with the banned cards, he actually argues that sometimes it's kind of unfair because you've invested quite a bit. So it's good that they're banned, but it's bad that they're banned.
Yeah, there's in a lot of cases, there's a lot of pros and cons to just about anything you do in a lot of cases.
Yeah. And I think exactly for that reason, if you're gonna invest, because there is money involved here.
Oh yes.
If you're going to invest in playing online, that maybe you find a couple YouTube videos so you can compare them and decide what sort of format sounds like you'd be comfortable in.
Or even just I think the standard one is the easiest one to get started with in a lot of cases now. Yeah. Pioneer, which I think is the variant here now, which lets you kind of play with all the cards, any of the cards you wanted to play with.
You could play with a fully mixed deck.
Yeah. Is a great way to just kind of get started in general. If only just because, you go to standard and you can be able to go to play a couple games for a couple weeks here if that was what you really wanted to try.
Right.
Versus if you had Pioneer, you might have a concern in which you might be limited about who you can play with, because some people may not want to be able to play with people who are using the older cards, because again, some cards might be a little bit more broken or the mechanics might not be the same.
There are banned cards.
And some banned cards as well.
He said there are banned cards in Pioneer. He said it was an extension of something, or an earlier form called Frontier.
Yes. So there's been a couple different variations for this. As much as Magic has kind of acknowledged that there is a format that lets you play with older cards that are not in the standard rotation, they're actually, again, the fact that they're coming out with, they made a point of it calling it Pioneer, is really more or less a way of them saying that, we're going to allow more cards for tournaments based off your ability to construct cards and use constructed decks. Although
this is it's limited to it's on a limited number of planes.
Yeah, because there's only so many planes on the Magic Arena format, because most of those cards are a lot of the stuff within the last 4 to 5 years. Like Zendikar, which is a very popular drafting expansion that they had, is like an example of something that's not in standard rotation right now, but a lot of people really like those cards, so they're available in the.
There's a whole separate Zendikar glossary. I saw it.
Oh yeah. It was a very popular.
The Egyptian one appears to have been very popular.
Yes. Yeah, a lot of people fall in love with certain expansions.
There are people who want the Egyptians back.
There's a lot of people who want the Zendikars people back. There's a lot of people who want everything back. If you go to any Magic convention, one of the creators made a point of walking the floor, and other people obviously know who he is. It's Rosewater. I forget what his first name is. I only know him from Robo Rosewater, which is an online generator that generates Magic the Gathering cards based off random collections of rules that it just kind of spools together and creates out of whole cloth. And what's interesting about it is that the art in the background is the same all the time, but they're different variations. So you might have a wagon wheel, which is this card is not a really well created card, we know that, but it's a card that we created from this generator. And then you have ones that are computers that are computer rooms from the 60s and 70s. It's this is a much better card. It's a much more created card. It's betterly generated from our system. And then you have other ones that are networky. These are actual cards that you theoretically could use in a game that we created. So that's how I know it. But the creator basically made a point of saying that a lot of people came up to me today and told me that I should probably go back to every plane that ever existed, and they should bring back every card that ever existed at one point, but not in that particular way. They said, we should go back to Zendikar. We should go back to, this other plane, or we should go back to this other plane. So
It was. So there are so many different
online personalities that are
Yeah.
just out there. And again, they're
this
just
realm.
playing Magic the Gathering in either a card format or on the game or
Well,
online.
arena's very popular, and people genuinely like all the options that you have, and you have in arena a ton of options.
Mhm. It's
Again, if you want to play an arena, go watch some YouTube because you'll find out which options you want to take.
it's going to be eventually one of those things that I think at the end of the day that when you go to actual tournaments, like they're not even going to have the cards anymore. That they're just going to have the game up. Because the game will have all the rules built into it. You're not going to need a judge.
And you're going
There
to
it all.
pull your cards because you can build your own arena deck.
And or even at worst, the game creators can literally curate the game to
Based on a deck,
based
okay.
on either deck types or like, oh, you're in this version, you're in
So you draft a deck.
you or sealed in some cases or drafting. Like they're working on drafting right now. I don't know if they've figured out how to put that in just yet, but
Yeah.
but I think that's one that they're working on trying to get in because they've had other variants of that in the Magic Online version that did have draft in it.
Okay. So arenas seems to be evolving quickly.
Did you get to try Arena out at all?
I did.
Did you get through the tutorial at minimum?
I got through the tutorial.
And the tutorial, I think, is a really good example of here's kind of what to expect when you're playing the game.
I got a little overwhelmed when I started trying to play.
Yeah.
Okay.
It can be very overwhelming.
It's a lot at one time. So I finally went, okay, enough for today. So I got through a deck creation,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm red.
Yeah, that's
Big
okay.
surprise.
That's okay.
I like my little goblins.
They're good goblins. They're good boys.
Yeah. So I got through creating the deck, but then by the time I finished that process, I was like, okay, I'm
Done for now.
I'm done for now.
I'll come back another day.
Yeah.
I find that sometimes in Magic the Gathering can be overwhelming for people who are not used to it all that
Yeah.
often. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think it's a good sign of that how well the game is just naturally created that you can have kind of not necessarily even concerns, but just variations on what ends up happening most days.
You have so many options.
Yes.
You have so many options, and that that's there's so many reasons why I went looking for other resources.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, besides YouTube, which is a tremendous resource. Okay, so that was a great resource. There's all sorts of other resources out there too. There are Reddit has a don't even get me started.
Oh yeah, well,
yeah.
mind you, but that's true of anything on Reddit, though.
Okay, so that
Yeah.
can get overwhelmed.
Reddit's a rabbit hole that if you really wanted to know, like, how much HP does this one guy have in a game and what are his exact abilities, you'll get like 15 posts on Reddit that are just like, yeah, this is how much life this guy has. This is how you beat it if you're this character, this character, this character. If you're using this abilities,
there's
rabbit holes on rabbit holes.
Okay, so there's all sorts of things out there that aren't just podcasts or vlogs. There's all sorts of other resources out there, and there are some of them that as you can see, I printed because I thought, okay, this is going to be helpful to me forever. Okay, like there are archetype plays, like scenario strategies that you can have different variations on that have to do with your specific deck.
Mm-hmm.
That where because your deck tends to be this, and this, you can sort of it's almost like setting a pick in basketball where you have plays that you would run.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So there are whole written things that if you're a red deck, a white deck, or what, there are whole written things that are set plays, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, you see a person. There's a big meta commentary on a lot of the decks in a lot of cases that if you have this one card, you probably have these next 2 to 3 to 5 cards in your deck as well, because they are well known to play well with one another.
They're
and
synergistic,
they're very synergistic, and a lot of people know that with these 5 cards in your deck, you are already kind of pretty well set, and you just need like another like 20 some odd cards for other stuff in some cases. So a lot of times you might have different archetypes like Turbo Fog, Storm. There's a couple different variations that I've heard of over time.
And the other interesting thing is there are rules for certain types of sorcery, and there are different ways to interpret some types of sorcery and how they function. So there are strong opinions.
And a lot of those strong opinions get boiled down to, or often get boiled down to the notion of what the judges think is the correct way that they play at the end of the day.
Yeah. So I was surprised to find that some of it's really subjective.
Some of it can be, because again, the way everything is worded.
Not a lot, but yeah.
Sometimes the way things are worded, the intention is one way, but it's entirely depicted as another.
Yeah.
And it might be that you need, like, I would maybe example it to, like, construction in your case, because it's kind of what you're in, that, oh, you need to have 3 feet for these walls. 3 feet of what? Between the next wall, between the next entrance, 3 feet above.
Well, okay, so people say I have a 6-inch slab on grade. Okay, how many inches of base rock? How many inches of compacted soil? What is your compaction rate?
Yeah.
To what SBO standard? And what is the PSI in your concrete? How much rebar do you have? And all of that is a slab on grade. So
there's layers into it.
There's layers into it. So I totally.
In your case, literally.
Yeah, literally. But layers in this. So I was amazed by the number of online resources.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so tremendous online support. The other thing that really impressed me was that they seem to have a number of different channels for new releases, and new releases seem to be like an every 10 days, once a week sort of thing. Releases of small, not full-on releases, but releases of different elements, bonus packs, different. Their arena seems to be very active in
releasing content and releasing it kind of over a longer period of time. So it always feels like you have to be on there to see what the new thing is coming out on it.
And they'll send you email.
Oh, yeah. I've got quite a bit of an email.
I would suggest you have your own sort of Gmail account for Arena.
I have a separate email account. One is my personal account. Another one is my gamer account, where all my gamer and stuff filters through, and it's an email address I almost never check, because it's all. I usually always highlight it for stuff that I don't usually go to check very often. That Gmail account is just full of spam and updates for games that I don't play anymore.
Yeah, so it would. One of the things that struck me was, if you're in Arena, you're going to get all sorts of notices about different things. There are, it reminds me actually a lot of I'm a Starbucks Rewards member because I drink coffee, and they send me like every other day.
A new notice about, here's a new coffee drink.
Yeah. Well, on Thursday, there's happy hour. If you bring it's 2 for 1 after 2 o'clock on Frappuccinos, and you have the same sort of thing within Arena.
Yeah.
To some extent, because you have
incentives to want to keep you logged on, come back every day. Oh, we're doing something special today, so you wouldn't want to miss it, like stuff.
There's
like
a lot of that, but then so there's a lot of that within Arena. But even if you weren't in Arena, there are releases, much like the Pioneer release. There was Commander.
So we can get Commander as one of the formats that they have.
Okay, so there was a major Commander release just a couple weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of support. A lot of not support. A lot of engagement.
Yeah, Wizards of the Coast, I think, is one of the very good companies that does realize that that their community is while it seems like a very big community online, it's a very large number of people that play the game. That a lot of their community is not going to be able to go to their big conventions. A lot of their community is not going to be able to kind of exist and not play without playing with like the 5 to 6 friends that they play with, and so I think it's they've very much understood that that if you take care of your community at the end of the day by constantly giving them stuff to do in it, or new stuff to constantly coming out, that they stay engaged rather well. And I can tie this back to some online games, because I'm primarily an online game player, that some games go stale after a while because people stop playing it because they've been playing the same thing constantly for the last 4 or 5 months and nothing new has happened. Fortnite's actually a very good example of this, where Fortnite's actually release stuff every about month and a half to 2 months, new stuff that happens in their game frequently and constantly, to the point that a lot of people, if it gets stale in 2 months after what we're doing with whatever thing we're doing right now, in another 2 months something weird is going to happen again. And so I don't have to worry, I'll just either stick it out or I'll just come back in a month after, if I've gotten tired of whatever this current version stuff is.
Well, and there are lots of people who theorize that that's why the planes change so often.
I would imagine that's probably the case too, that a lot of times the planes change because it's re-engaging your community and whatever new stuff is happening. It's also a chance to sell your community on more stuff.
I was going to say, there's a lot of commentary on the monetizing of the game.
Oh, yeah.
But, I think if you're going to keep it alive and vibrant, you have to monetize the game.
And this also goes back to my notion of, just in general, of Japanese animation, is that I found that, back in the day, people pirated a lot of anime, not because it wasn't available in the West, but because it was much easier to get it by pirating it. Because if you were watching a current show right now that got licensed here in America, people would stop producing producing it, the subs for it.
Yeah.
But then you would wait about a good 2 years for it to come out in America, and then you'd have to actually buy it. And by 2 years from now, you may not be interested in whatever show that came out 2 years ago, especially if you had actually just pirated it and watched it. What would be the reason of watching it again, except for nostalgia?
Well, so, and I'll actually take it to a different place. And you'll wince at this. There was a game. There were several games actually in Facebook that were extremely popular. Farmville being one of them,
mm-hmm.
and it had a spinoff of Pioneerville or something like that. And those games simply aren't played anymore, nope. and they've pretty much gone away. A lot of that is that it got, I think, stale. It certainly, I think it got a reputation for costing a lot of money because people were accidentally spending money they didn't know they were spending.
Mm-hmm.
I think you see trends like Candy Crush, which I think I knew a number of people that were playing, but I don't know that many.
We can continue to play it anymore.
Yeah, or Word with Friends, which I thought I had a number of friends who aren't playing anymore. So. I think that there's a shelf life to games unless you do this.
And I would agree with that in a lot of cases.
That's probably a bad analogy, but...
Well, no, I think it's a very good analogy that a lot of games simply just do not exist anymore, especially online games that are very much bent about the social interaction or the ability to kind of interact with other people, that unless you're constantly engaging with the community or doing stuff in the community, that you simply just wouldn't play it anymore if that wasn't around. And and as a person that's been a long time proponent of online games, especially when it comes to the nature of MMOs and other online games, that
what's an MMO?
Oh, that's what we're talking about next week.
Oh, okay.
So
okay.
The MMO I mean by massively multiplayer online games.
Okay.
And this is going to be in Magic. In Magic Arena, could be an MMO at one. It could be considered as an MMO.
Actually, no. Because when your younger brother was like 10, he was playing one, and I insisted upon being on when he was on because I was concerned.
He was also much younger.
He was much younger.
Yeah.
And I was concerned about him being online because there were adults playing as well as kids. And so I would actually be online in another room at the same time he was with my own character to make sure that
No, I fully understand that. I mean, like, because he wouldn't have been that old by that point.
Yeah, he wasn't. Yeah.
So, but anyways, we're actually gonna talk about MMOs next week because this weekend has got cool news that's coming out for the one I play, World of Warcraft. BlizzCon is this weekend, so while I watch that, I'll gush over what new stuff comes out next time we're on.
Well, do you know, of all the patterns I've ever created for knitting, the one that has gotten the most downloads has been
my lion.
Your World of Warcraft lion beanie.
Oh yeah, and that's a very good beanie.
Yeah,
I like that beanie.
Yeah.
But no, we'll talk about Warcraft next week.
Okay.
But again, I mean, Magic Arena seems to be the one thing that a lot of people right now are playing, and it's very easy to get into with no real investment unless you really want to start investing in it.
Yeah, and by investing in it, it's buying the supplemental packs.
Yeah, and that's all you're really buying at the end of the day. It's just you're buying cards.
But
online.
But the starter pack is nothing.
No. It's again, the entire game itself is free.
Right.
You play enough that you get more cards based off your wins eventually.
Yeah.
That you could just keep playing.
And there are special cards for special days, let me tell you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then so the intention of just buying the packs is just getting the cards quicker.
Yeah.
But even then you don't know what cards you might be getting in that particular case either.
Yeah.
Unless there might be some sort of special promotion or giveaway.
Yeah.
But to tie it back to the keeping your community engaged and entertained at the end of the day, I think that's very important to continuously be communicating with your community.
Yeah.
And in a lot of games I know that don't communicate with their community just die out real quickly.
Yeah.
And even just some great, like at the end of the day, as much as we might think that, or I might think at this point here that for a great number of years, Star Trek didn't have a community. After the Enterprise, after Voyager went off the air and then they got replaced with Enterprise, which a lot of people didn't enjoy that show.
Right.
And I can understand why they didn't enjoy that show, because it felt like it was not, maybe not in the spirit, but it was certainly like retconning a lot of stuff that was happened that had already been kind of decided as this was fact-based stuff, because it took place in the 21st century or the 22nd century, not the 23rd century, which
right.
in 24th century.
Yeah.
But a lot of people didn't like that for a number of years until the J.J. Abrams movies came out. There was not really a fan base for Star Trek, because a lot of people, because it just was not on everyone's forefront minds. It wasn't a notion to talk about it with your friends.
There wasn't anything happening.
There wasn't anything happening.
You still got your Hallmark ornaments every year, though.
Oh yeah, I love those Hallmark ornaments.
Yeah.
But the community itself was just not engaged because there was nothing coming out for it, and the only way you were really continuing that might be in a lot of fan communities, and again through our fanfics and people who actually wrote legitimate books for different stuff and tabletop games.
And there's some fanfic for this thing too.
Oh, there's a lot of fanfic for Magic the Gathering. I mean, there's a lot of people who just do fan art for Magic the Gathering outside of just stuff. Like there's some people who really just fall in love with a card or fall in love with a character, and that's all they end up doing is just that one card or character. So
if you want to engage with this, there's like a lot of ways to do it. I was really impressed with that.
What I actually find very interesting is not actually just so much the game, but so much as just trying to follow the story. Like there's a YouTube channel, and I'll have to try to find it again, that told the story of Magic the Gathering through the different expansions, and told like the legitimate I
actually did find
lore
this
story.
It's like 2 hours
for just like one expansion.
Oh, I think the one I was looking at really took it from
like one port to another.
Yeah.
I've seen some that are just like one character, like one of the major planewalkers, like Liliana or Chandra or Jace, and I've seen some of them that are like 4 or 5 part series that are each like 20-minute long videos in and of themselves. And to think that there's like this, beyond this, the fact that if you didn't know that there was this lore happening in the background, that the game itself is just a game and this is just a card, this is just a character in a card, that there's this giant overlapping lore that's happening behind the scenes, which would make sense because these are also some of the same people that do, the Dungeons and Dragons game.
Yeah.
So
which definitely has lore behind it.
Oh, there's quite a bit of lore behind some of that stuff. But I think a lot of, for me, I think the fun of Dungeons and Dragons, you can make your own lore that still kind of fits in whatever world you're working in.
Yeah.
versus Magic is a very definitive lore that's happening that unless you're like really kind of following along, you don't actually know is actually existing at all.
Yeah, because you could play without knowing it.
And that was actually one of my more interesting notions that before I started watching Lodi the Reading runs Friday nights, because like it just cause they have their own thing where they call Commodore Hustle, which is just their Seinfeld versions of themselves just dicking around most of the time.
Yeah.
Excuse my language for that, but like the Friday nights version is just more like an extension, but it's more focused on Magic.
Yeah.
But there is apparently, I didn't realize there was actually this wealth of story happening in the background of Magic the Gathering until I started watching the show and just thinking and listening to them and hearing about like, oh yeah, it was Emrakul, and I was like, yeah, duh. I was like, wait, there's a story.
There's a story, and there's a video trying to explain the story that has a gingerbread girl playing.
I couldn't tell you.
Playing that character, and acting out the whole thing with some non-gingerbread people. It was weird.
We nerds are weird.
Well, no, but yes, yeah. So there is lore.
Oh yeah, no, and the lore is very interesting. So to kind of wrap this up a little bit, like, would you recommend Magic the Gathering to another person?
Yes, if you were looking for a strategy game, because there's definitely a lot of strategy involved in it.
Mm-hmm.
I like the things I really liked were that it moves briskly, and we were playing somewhat slowly because I was still learning, but it still moves briskly.
Yeah, you can.
So you're not obligating yourself to a tremendous amount of time, and it looks like if you're playing an arena, you're not obligating. You're playing for like a 20-30 minute time period.
Yeah, and sometimes might be even shorter depending on the decks that you're playing with.
Yeah.
But I find, again, the intention of the game was to be able to play something for about 10, 15 minutes, 15, 20 minutes between shows or different things happening at a convention.
Okay.
And that was kind of the original intent of the game that Wizards of the Coast was trying to do, because they were going to conventions and they noticed people had downtime between the different stuff that they were doing, so they wanted to give them something to do in that downtime.
Well, that makes sense. So I like that you weren't obligating yourself. Like, I love Monopoly, but Monopoly is hours.
Yeah, and Monopoly, depending on who you play with, could be what you do for the evening for the next 4 hours.
Yeah. So I like the idea you can
until inevitably it's like one person leaves and then everyone else until one person kind of like ends up losing the game and everyone else is just like,
I got my hotels in Park Place. I'm not losing.
Yeah, and then everyone else is just like, okay, whatever, let's move on.
Yeah,
let's go. Yeah. Let's all go do something else now because one person got, and then, but there's always the two people like, no, we're gonna win this thing.
We're going to the end.
We're going to the end.
We're going to the end.
And then everyone else is like, all right, we're gonna go watch Seinfeld. You guys continue having fun with yourselves, whatever.
Yeah. So a couple people could break off after Thanksgiving dinner, mm-hmm. and go play in the other room. And still not lose the rest of the evening. Could still have pumpkin pie. So I like that. I like that. The downside for me, and this is talking about sort of the overwhelm factor in arena and things, is that it would take you a while to familiarize yourself with the cards and how to best use them. By the time we played the third hand, I was getting kind of the hang of it.
Mm-hmm.
But how to use the cards, because they are synergistic, and you want to play them certain things in combination or have certain things set up for when you draw such
and you might hold
card.
on to a card until the most advent time to use it.
I held on to that sorcery card until I knew I was going to just blow you out of the water.
And again, when to know when to use the cards and when to play them and how not to play them. And I think the reason I'm not really big into Magic the Gathering is that as much as I could strategize and play the game, and I do enjoy playing the game.
Yeah.
My mental problem is that I need to know what all the cards do, because I need to know either A, what I'm playing against, B, what I am going to play against, and if I want to build my own deck, I want to know what cards to use and what cards not to use.
Right.
And that comes a lot from just playing the game. Eventually you would figure this out by just playing the game for a long period.
There's a level of familiarity you need to have in order to do it well.
Yeah, and a lot of people want to get into it to do it well immediately rather than just kind of have the immediate fun.
And so it's going to take you a while to do that. And I guess that for me was the downside. Again, I printed myself some tools to
help yourself.
To help me, and the biggest one being the glossary. And then I like the idea of having set plays. If you have a particular deck, these are strategies that you probably could use in some form because you'll have this, and this.
Yeah.
And I liked the idea of sort of knowing or having an attack in advance. So if I continue to play, I'll have tools.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think at the end of the day, when it comes to Magic the Gathering, it's not a difficult game to get into. It's certainly a very overwhelming game to get started with. But I think once you understand the rules of it and learn that there are key terms and what to look out for in those key terms and know how to find what they mean, you eventually learn what they are.
Yeah.
But it can be a somewhat overwhelming game to start with, but it can be quite a bit of fun once you figure it out, once you've got it kind of figured out.
Yeah, and I like one of the things that I would say is a real advantage is that there are so many ways to play. So if you started and you say I really like the game, but I don't know if I'm comfortable with this way of playing it, there are so many other forms available on your phone, online, and I find that appealing.
Oh, I find the online component to it now, especially with Magic Arena, to be basically like a zero sum to get into the game. A lot of games require that you buy into the game to get into it at all, while other games require a little less dedication to it necessarily. And I think that as it is right now, that Magic the Gathering has... through Magic the Gathering Arena, essentially their online variant, has a very minimal and very easy entry point, and very easy to try it out. And if you don't like it, all you invested was maybe an hour or two in the game at the end of the day. And so, very easy to find out whether you like it or not. Versus our topic next week, which you could give it a try. And if you didn't like it, well, F you lost quite a bit of money getting into it.
Yeah.
So, but again, we're going to...
So next week, World of Warcraft.
So next week, we're going to talk about World of Warcraft.
And you've been at that one for a long time.
Oh, this is something I know, unfortunately, too much on. And we're actually going to play it for a bit here, too.
Okay.
So we'll find a day to do that. But in the meantime, we're going to post some of the things that we discuss here, some of the things Mom found in glossaries, and some of the things she found online. We'll post that online onto our website at nerdtutorialpodcast.com. I also figured out widgets on the website, so now we can actually now we're not going to have the link anymore on the webpage. There's going to be an actual bar at the top. You can just play it right from the browser.
Oh, very good.
So I finally figured out that out, which is kind of a cool thing, I think. But we're going to have that. But we'll have that on our website. Then we're also going to post everything on our tutorial as well. There's a couple anime that I've watched here that I'm definitely going to be talking about soon.
Okay.
And then if there's anything that we got wrong or anything you want to comment, critique, or future topics you think we could do, let me know on nerdtutorial at nerd_tutorial on Twitter, and I'm more than happy to engage with our fellow audience to try to find new ways to learn and new topics we could do here eventually too. So on behalf of myself, thank you so much for listening to us, and we should go play some Magic.
Goblin on.
All right. We'll see you guys next time.
Bye.